Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here with another new episode, a very interesting exploration in a lost comic strip, Mitzi McCoy. One of the comic strips of the 1940s that was done by Kreigh Collins. You may not know Kreigh Collins, but was a cartoonist of note, certainly managed to get himself syndicated in dozens of newspapers across the country. And The Complete Mitzi McCoy is a brand new collection from Kreigh Collins' grandson, Brian, and it's an exploration of the strip that also led to an adventure strip called Kevin the Bold. And this is a great collection because it not only typifies the kind of comic strip entertainment that was going on in the 1940s. This was episodic adventure. Mitzi McCoy, kind of a pinup girl adventurer, much in the mold of Brenda Starr and Torchy Smith, some more famous versions of the female adventurer back in the day. But also in a lot of ways, Kreigh explored possible different tones for the strip, leaning on other characters, creating a very large cast of characters in, say, the guise of something, or in the same form as Gasoline Alley, for example. And it's really interesting because you discover the tones in each different story as Kreigh was trying to discover his voice, finally settling on Mitzi's ancestor, a kind of Conan-esque or Prince Valliant, more like a Prince Valliant kind of adventure strip called Kevin the Bold. And we do get the first couple Kevin the Bold stories in this volume as well. So it's really interesting, and I appreciate what Brian Collins has done in terms of exploring his grandfather's strip. Thought of it well enough that they tried to sell it and get it obviously in as many papers as possible. But, this is kind of one of the foot soldier cartoonists, if you will. And I don't say that to demean what Kreigh Collins did with his comic strip work. You're going to hear a lot about his illustration career, which, again, was well regarded, certainly in the state of Michigan. He was an important cartoonist to the state of Michigan. But, wasn't a Milton Caniff, wasn't a Leonard Starr, or a Alex Raymond, or some of the other greats of the 40s through the 60s. But, again, I think a very significant comic strip, and also kind of explores what it was like to be a working comic strip artist trying to break through. There's some great stuff in there. Correspondence with Collins editors and a lot of promotional stuff that was sent to prospective newspapers to entice them to pick up the Mitzi McCoy strip. And it's great. It really is. The illustration is fantastic. The storytelling is clear. And I think, again, it's a neat exploration of what it must have been like being a working cartoonist trying to find a syndicated audience. The Complete Mitzi McCoy, it's volume 1 of Kreigh Collins' journey through his cartooning career that Brian Collins, his grandson, has put out. It's an excellent book. It's from Lost Art Publishing. And again, as I've said on other shows, this is another great thing that would be an excellent Christmas present for your comic historian in your life. So really looking forward to my conversation today with Brian Collins about his grandfather Kreigh on today's Word Balloon. This episode of Word Balloon brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thanks a lot, League, for your support. It's the beginning of December. The subscriptions came in for November, and I thank you for your support. You are the executive producers of Word Balloon through your contributions at patreon.com. I say it all the time, and I mean it. Word Balloon is free. It will always be free. But if you like what I do here and want to help out the cause and can afford it, please consider subscribing to Word Balloon via patreon.com. You can go to patreon.com/wordballoon. That's where my page is. Or you can go to wordballoon.com, click on the Patreon ad, and that will take you to my Patreon page. But thank you very much for your support, League of Word Balloon listeners. This episode of Word Balloon is also brought to you by Aftershock Comics, who are shaking things up at your local comic shop right now. It's the Christmas season. It's time to start thinking about gifts for your friends and the comic book fan in your life. And Aftershock has a whole slew of books in many different genres that will definitely fit your comic friends' needs. And also introduce them to a new series or graphic novel that they maybe never had considered before. Things like A Walk Through Hell by Garth Ennis and Gordon Sunsuka. Baby Teeth, the year one hardcover available from Donny Cates and Gary Brown. The first 10 issues are already in stores this week. In a couple weeks, you'll see Witchhammer, Aftershock's first original graphic novel by Dalibor Talajic and Cullen Bunn. It's going to be in comic stores the week of December 19th. But you'll find a lot of great books and a lot of great genres written and drawn by your favorite writers and artists at Aftershock Comics. Don't take my word for it. You can check out full story descriptions, preview pages, and the diamond codes on these books to order through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. All right, let's get into our conversation now with Brian Collins about his grandfather, Kreigh Collins, the creator of Kevin the Bold and Mitzi McCoy. And we talk about the evolution of those strips and more on today's Word Balloon. Brian Collins, welcome to Word Balloon, and congratulations on what I imagine is a very interesting journey in your own family tree in the comic strip world.
Yeah, hi, John. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It has been a really amazing process putting this book together and kind of learning about the process as I've done it.
So, did you always know growing up about your grandfather's cartooning career? Did you know your grandfather?
I knew my grandfather just a little bit. He died before I was 10,
okay.
and he was living in Michigan. I was born in Michigan, but my family had moved away to Western New York State by then. So we would see them on the holidays, but my dad, my grandfather's oldest son, he and my grandfather weren't that close actually, and so I did know he was a cartoonist, and he was, did seem to be a certain amount of fame or whatever associated with that, but my dad really did not dwell on his career much, let's just say.
Understood. Well, and I'm glad that you've uncovered. What made you uncover these strips in this career?
Well, I work as a graphic artist, and I've worked as a freelancer for a long time, and so I was always, my grandfather was, he despite he and my dad not being very close, he did loom very large, and just the whole concept of working for himself and becoming successful, it kind of appealed to me. At one point, I acquired a couple of years of his comics. And then from then, just started discovering, I think this was before eBay even existed, but at that point, I just found other channels to find more of his comics. That's
great. And yeah, I can imagine, and especially as you say, prior to this eBay generation, we all talk about this in the pop culture world, about the pursuit of these kinds of artifacts in that pre-digital world. And, you had to go to collectors, newspapers and magazines and literally look in the classifieds and try and hunt stuff down. Did you put out any sort of classifieds yourself saying that? And forgive me, how do you pronounce your grandfather's full name?
It's Kreigh Collins.
Kreigh Collins. Okay. So, yeah, yes. Did you, wanted Kreigh Collins art? Did you do those kind of ads and things like that?
No, I didn't. I was working at this time. I was working a staff job in a place, and because I was in the art department, we had color printers, and there was an intern that came in, and he was a comic book collector, and he had purchased a comic book that was missing its cover, so he had a JPEG of the thing, and he asked me if I'd print it out for him.
Okay.
And so at that point, I mentioned my grandfather, and he said, "Oh, you could probably, and he's the one that led me to this site, and I don't even know what it is anymore, to tell you the truth, but he led me to the place, and I remember it was 2 years of Sunday half pages for $80, and I was like, "Hey, this is pretty cool." And,
wow.
And, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So it was. I guess, and then at that point, once I made this discovery and I printed them out, and I decided I printed out 2 sets, and I bound one into a 3-ring binder and sent it to my uncle Kevin.
Okay.
And at the time, Kevin was still living in the old family house, and despite my grandfather having passed away in 1974, my grandmother was still alive, and she was about 95 at the time, and so I knew that there was still some material left at the house,
okay.
But I knew in particular he'd be very interested in what I'd found.
Sure. And yeah, that I was going to ask that. What kind of did he have a reference file? I mean, how much do you know about Kreigh's process in terms of and what he saved?
Yeah. Okay. Well, he had a lot of files. He saved everything for better or worse, my grandmother donated almost all of his stuff to the Grand Rapids Public Library.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, no, it is good, and sometimes I feel a little bit jealous. Like when I've been there several times and doing research and photographing the original artwork for these comic strips, and thinking like, I try not to dwell on, this could all be mine, but it's really.
I understand.
It's really true that, if it was mine, I don't know where I'd store it, and nobody would ever see it. And in the situation being at the library, you just got to fill out a form, and the librarians there are fantastic, and they'll show you anything you want to see.
Are you aware, Cullen Murphy, who the son of John Cullen Murphy, and the guy who did the dialogue with his father for Prince Valliant after Hal Foster stopped doing the strip? Are you aware of that book that he put out at the beginning of this year called Cartoon?
The Connecticut Cartoonist.
Yep.
Yes, I am.
Yep. I am. Even prior to that book coming out, I've been fascinated by the life of these newspaper comic strip cartoonists, and I don't want to forgive me if this sounds like a slight, but you yourself say that Kreigh was not one of the household names, was not a Milton Caniff, was not even a John Cullen Murphy necessarily. But I'm a broadcaster, and I always call myself a journeyman broadcaster because I've worked consistently for over 25 years in radio. That said, actually longer than that. That said, it's I'm not one of the big names. I'm a foot soldier. And it sounds like, your grandfather, while having success, and we're going to talk about a couple of the strips, but, I don't even know, like Mitzi McCoy, this is a fascinating artifact in particular because how wide of a distribution did it have, a circulation did it have?
I'm not sure exactly. When it launched, it had about 40 papers, and it probably only got to 50 or something like that. And I don't even know what's typical for one of the NEA comics, but it kind of my grandfather's boss, this guy Ernest Lynn, he thought it had breakout potential, and I think it was pretty successful, but it just didn't pop the way that they were hoping, and I think that was more or less the reason why it morphed into the next version, Kevin the Bold. Yes,
which is fascinating, and I want to get to that, absolutely. I have to be honest, because I was reading, you provide an incredible text and history of Kreigh's background and what led to Mitzi McCoy in the book, and it's a beautiful strip, first of all, and obviously your grandfather was a hell of a draftsman, and really that perfect timing of beautiful girl art. I think of things like the Torchy comic strip and certainly Brenda Starr, and it seems like Mitzi McCoy is kind of in that vein, although as you say, as he was trying to build an audience, he was experimenting with the types of stories he was telling. There are absolutely upfront adventure stories and some noir kind of stories in there as well, but there also are kind of slice of life romance and a little somewhere along the lines of Archie in terms of just obviously adults rather than teenagers, but that kind of romance kind of thing. Would you agree?
Yeah, there was. When my grandfather first pitched the idea, it wasn't centered around the female, a female character. It was like she was just going to be one of the players, which is sort of how the strip ended up evolving. But his boss, I guess it was the marketing angle is name it after the girl and give her a more prominent role. That was all the syndicate's input.
Sure. No, it's great, man, and I love. There's even one story where they're doing a live pinup fashion show. And this is great, late 40s, so it's that classic, kind of glamour girl era and everything. And they even have the men dressing up in pinup costumes, which I think is pretty forward for the time and everything, and also really funny. It's an interesting idea for a story. So I really now these are Sunday strips. Was it always just a weekly strip, or was it a daily?
It was just a Sunday strip. When I was doing the research, there, like a lot of the material that's at the library in Grand Rapids, it's not all the correspondence, but it's like the bulk of the correspondence back and forth with his boss. And there was some talk about turning it into a daily, but it never materialized.
And as you say, now it at its height it had 50 papers. One of those papers, a very big paper, the Chicago Tribune, my hometown paper. And
go ahead. I'm sorry. I was going to say, yeah, that was actually the Trib picked up Kevin the Bold when it launched. So Mitzi itself never appeared in it. There was a Christmas sequence, December 1949, that ran on Saturdays in the Trib, but it was not Mitzi McCoy branded. It was just called The Christmas Story. It was kind of a generic thing, but the artwork was exactly the same as the Mitzi comics that were appearing in the other papers at the time.
I see, and you also lay out too a lot of the strips and features that your grandfather did prior to Mitzi. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, please. You fill in the blanks now, and if you wanted to, you can highlight some of these that he had done.
Yeah, no. It was he'd gotten a lot of exposure in the 40s, right before Mitzi started. He was doing religious comics for the Methodist Publishing House.
Okay.
And what these things were Bible story comics. They were part of a Sunday school package, and so these things were distributed to the kids going to Sunday school.
Sure.
And I think there might have been a distribution up to 500,000 of these things every week. So I don't know that his name got any recognition because these things were probably kind of disposable. Understood. But at any rate, there was a lot of exposure, of some sort.
That's cool. And then he kind of did it wasn't a Ripley's Believe It or Not, but there was this kind of factual feature that he was drawing as well, correct?
Yes, that was earlier. That was in the 30s. It was for the centennial of Michigan's statehood, and so it appeared in 6 or 10 newspapers in Michigan, and it was a daily. And I think it was 3 or 4 facts that were illustrated in a single panel, and it ended up running for about a year and a half. And so this was again great exposure in his home state of Michigan.
Man, you got to get Tim Allen and see if you can do a combination of your grandfather's art and get somebody like Tim Allen, who I know does a lot of Michigan tourism, radio and TV spots, and have him read the factoids or whatever. I think that might be an interesting little modern and throwback kind of Michigan kind of celebration.
Yeah, well, hopefully sooner than the 200th anniversary of Michigan statehood.
Maybe 175 if we're around that ballpark. I'm not sure.
There we go. Good, yeah.
There you go. And again, forgive me, I'm not going to do the math. But no, it's really interesting. All right, so we mentioned Kevin the Bold, and I love the fact, and I'm assuming that this was the norm in some strips, that it's like a television backdoor pilot where on All in the Family we meet Cousin Maud. And then, within the year, B. Arthur has her own series as Maud. And,
right.
That kind of thing. And so, literally, Kevin the Bold, which is kind of a Prince Valliant era sort of strip. And all of a sudden, they're talking in the newsroom. And Stubby, the editor, is saying, oh, yeah, you ever hear about Mitzi's relatives? And, oh, yeah, it goes way, way back. And all of a sudden, we get this great backdoor introduction into Kevin the Bold. That's great.
Yeah. No, it was interesting because there were several times during Mitzi McCoy's run where they did this kind of a narrative, throwback kind of thing, and these sequences tended to generate more fan mail, and so this they thought, well, this is the perfect setup to change the thing into Kevin the Bold, and it was interesting because the papers that had already that had been running Mitzi McCoy. The first several Kevin the Bold episodes didn't have the Kevin the Bold logo. It was Mitzi McCoy, the McCoy family legend. Oh. And so it was maybe after 3 or 4 weeks of that, then they just started running it as Kevin the Bold itself. But the papers like the Tribune that picked up Kevin only on its launch, they had the Kevin the Bold logo as part of the artwork.
Got it. Now, I noticed, too, that obviously this is Kreigh Collins Volume 1. And
yes.
How many years did Mitzi run?
Mitzi ran for just under 2.
Okay. And then Kevin had a really impressive run, right?
Yeah, Kevin ran for 18 years.
That's awesome.
And initially, after I bought these first 2 years of Sundays, and I told my Uncle Kevin about it, and it turned out he had a bunch of comics that hadn't been given to the library, so he started sending me these packages as he kind of excavated them from the different storage places in his house. And so he and I, right away, we were both, thought, oh, this would be great. Let's do a Kevin the Bold book. This is the more famous strip. And anyway, the when I was getting the comics, I didn't get episode 1 to episode 1000 or anything. They were kind of missing here and there.
Sure.
And so I started filling in the blanks here and there, eBay or another package from Uncle Kevin. But the idea of Kevin the Bold book, because it ran so long, was kind of intimidating. So
True,
I think about
years, yeah.
Yeah, so about the third package I got from Kevin included all these Mitzi McCoy strips. And I had heard a little bit about it, but I had never seen one. And when I saw, I think there's 99, I was like, oh, that's definitely a more manageable book. It's clear where it's going to begin and where it's going to end. So that became the focus.
Interesting. So do you think for subsequent volumes, are you going to pick some of like Kevin's better stories? What do you think you're going to do?
Well, the publisher I'm working with, he wants to for volume 2, he wants to do a book of the religious comics.
Okay, sure.
And he's got apparently he's got a complete set of them, and I've seen maybe half of them tear sheets that are at the library or ones that my uncle still has, and actually I think it would be a great idea because the artwork again is very nice. And the story is obviously quite timeless, so it's not going to appear dated, But so, anyways, that's the plan for volume 2. Would be the Bible Stories comics.
That's fantastic, and it's interesting because it really does show the versatility of Kreigh. Let's take a moment from our conversation with Brian and talk to you a bit about one of our sponsors today, Aftershock Comics. Now, I know you know all about Aftershock's titles. You've seen them on the racks of your favorite comic shop, a whole slew of fresh high concepts, titles written and drawn by your favorite creators. It's Christmas season. This is a perfect time to consider a gift of a trade, a graphic novel from a top creative team and a brand new story that isn't on their usual radar as far as your friends who love comics. There are great books to choose from right now. The spy series Jimmy's Bastards from Garth Ennis and Russ Braun. There's also Pestilence from Frank Thierry and Oleg Akunev, where the 14th century Black Plague from history is actually revealed as the first recorded zombie outbreak. You can get the first trade now, whet their appetite, and the second trade will be available in early January. There's a great volume on Donny Cates and Gary Brown's series, Baby Teeth, Year 1 hardcover, the first 10 issues, in comic shops this week and available now at AftershockComics.com. There's also Witchhammer, Aftershock's first original graphic novel from Cullen Bunn and Dalibor Talajic. That's going to be in comic shops December 19th. We'll be talking to more creators from Aftershock in the days and weeks ahead, and you'll hear all about some of these excellent books. But you don't have to wait. Check out full story descriptions, preview pages, and the diamond codes on these books and more to order through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. Let's get back to our conversation with Brian Collins about Mitzi McCoy and Kevin the Bold on Word Balloon. Mitzi teases in a very clean way. It was very interesting to learn that your grandfather kind of modeled Mitzi after Rita Hayworth.
Yes.
But it's definitely that kind of friendly cheesecake, if you will, of the period. And then, to do the Bible stories as well. And again, it just shows your grandfather's versatility. And then you go to this kind of, warrior sort of adventure strip in Kevin. That's really interesting. And I think that's terrific. I hope that eventually you will get to, we have some Kevin stories in the Mitzi book, which is cool.
Yes.
But I can appreciate, because you figure, were you able to figure out how, did he do, when he was doing Mitzi, now it was a Sunday strip, so was it, 4 stories a year, 6 stories a year? Yeah,
they ran, usually they're about 8 weeks long or so.
Okay,
so sure. I think if there's basically 12 different storylines in the nearly 2 years that the comic ran. So cool. About six a year.
Interesting. No, I love it, man. Do you remember what were some of your favorite comic strips back in the day?
Peanuts.
Sure, of course.
When I was young, I liked Broomhilda. It's
sure, Broomhilda, absolutely.
in BC.
I love BC. I was a big Johnny Craig fan. Absolutely, not Johnny. Johnny Hart.
Johnny Hart. Yes. So that kind of stuff. But
that's excellent, man. No, I'm with you. Hagar the Horrible was a big favorite of mine as well. And I hadn't really gotten into the dramas or the adventure strips until I got older. And now I really do appreciate not just the adventure strips. You start with Kniff. And I want to point out too, because Kevin the Bold and we compare it to Prince Valliant. Hey, Kniff was out there doing Terry and the Pirates and Steve Canyon, and there was still room for Frank Robbins to do a Johnny Hazard adventure strip, which is very clearly inspired by the Kniff stuff, but it's still great stuff, and that's the thing. And certainly all the King Feature Syndicate adventure strips that Lee Falk did, Mandrake the Magician and the Phantom, and some of these things. But I really now, as I'm older, really into and now I'm blanking on his name. Rip Kirby, the guy who created Flash Gordon as well. And shame on me. But
Alex Raymond?
Alex Raymond, of course, Alex Raymond. Yeah, stuff like that. And now I'm looking at my bookshelf. The Secret Agent Corrigan that started off as Secret Agent X9 that started with Raymond, and then guys like Al Williamson took over. I love that stuff. And even Apartment 3G. And some of the soap operas, and Gil Thorpe was a great sports drama that played out in the Tribune locally. So it really is interesting because these were made for an adult audience. Or I should say a general audience.
Yeah, they were definitely some adult themes in Mitzi, and but then for a new chapter they'd introduce like a young boy, and he'd kind of take a big part, and so you could see they're trying to rope in some younger readers, and then there's a young girl featured in another sequence. So it was interesting how they were trying to really broaden the reach of the strip.
Well, that's what I think makes the book very interesting too, because you are on the journey with Kreigh as he's trying to figure out what the right formula might be for this. I mean, as great as it is to examine the big hits, it's great to see something like this that was and again, I feel like I'm condescending. Not a minor hit, but I mean, 40 papers is certainly an impressive number. But yeah, and again, just the experimentation. And I think you do a great job with your text pieces that accompany each story as Kreigh is trying to figure out, all right, what's going to sell here? Oh, let's put a dog in on this story.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. And as the cast expanded as well. It's really cool, and you really feel like you're on a journey with Kreigh as he's trying to figure this strip out.
Yeah, and it was what was really great for me was just reading all the correspondence between him and his boss, because it filled in a lot of the blanks, and a lot of the things that they're talking about are things you're still hearing about now, like people's attention spans shortening, and how television is killing off the serial comic strips.
Wow, even in the 40s, that was a concern. Go on.
Yeah. The glowing box, I think they called it, or something like that. But and also in talking about newspapers shutting down, and it's like, it's been a long, slow process, and it's sad to hear, but it's interesting too.
Totally. No, and again, that's and truly, it breaks my heart, because I do think the comic strips were always really, really interesting. A wide variety from the gag strips to the continuing story strips. And they hold up. Honestly, they're like watching Turner Classic Movies. It feels like that in the best possible way, that they're evocative of the time. And God, the art is beautiful. The storytelling is really tight. And I think it's a really great examination of what was popular entertainment back then. And God, I mean, you and I both were close enough in age, I'm assuming, that we remember riding the subway or the public transportation, and everybody's face buried in a newspaper.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the way home or on the way to work. And so that's the thing. And that, I know from reading all of these histories of comic strips how important the comic section was to the sales of a newspaper, as important as the news and the sports. And you needed a good couple pages to keep readers' attention.
Definitely, and like now, images are just everywhere. But yeah, in the 40s, it was like the only color that appeared in the paper was the comic section, and so it was a really splashy kind of section.
Yeah. So did you have to touch up anything and reconstruct anything to make it look better than whatever found original art you were able to work with?
Yes, very much so. The comics I got back that I received from my uncle, I mean, they hadn't been They were very yellowed. Some of them were torn. Sure. Some of them were in really bad shape, and so they all took a lot of color correcting. And there were, in some cases, they were tabloid comics that the way that the NEA formatted their comics, the tabloids were missing a little panel, the throwaway panel, and it was so it was kind of like finding a throwaway panel or recreating it. Maybe from a crummy black and white microfilm version, and trying to touch it up as best I could without ruining the artwork or anything like that. But there was quite a bit of reconstructing some of these things.
Fantastic, man. No, really, really a great job. And again, you were kind enough to send me a digital copy. And I mean, good Lord, the digital copy looks great. And can't wait to see the finished book as well. But this really is, it's a really interesting look at a working class cartoonist who, achieved, I mean, how would you gauge your grandfather's career?
Well, he was it's interesting because he started as a painter. He was classically trained, and he went to Europe as like a really young man and was painting in the Louvre and the banks of the Seine and all this sort of cliche things. He worked like crazy. His career started in the Depression, but he kept busy and he always did pretty well. At a certain point, I think he was painting murals for the Texas Centennial or something, 1936, wow. And he had an accident and fell off a scaffolding, and he kind of wrecked his shoulder. Oh, and so this kind of killed his painting career for a while, but he started doing the black and white, pen and ink illustration. And so that's about when the newspaper, the daily feature, the Do You Know thing that appeared in Michigan started. So it was kind of like he almost fell into cartooning because the Do You Know thing led to the Bible Stories comics, and then that led to his association with the NEA. So in my mind, he was a bigger name than I think he was, because he, like I said, he loomed large in our family. And it was interesting because when I was trying to find a publisher for the book, I thought, there's never been a collection of my grandfather's work. This should, somebody should want to do this, and the publishers weren't lining up.
Understood. Yeah.
But it was great because the guy I did find, it's right up his alley, and he publishes artists like my grandfather, and now we've got a pretty nice partnership, and he wants to put out several more volumes of my grandfather's artwork. So I think that's just incredible, and it's like this book took me about 5 years from starting to scan the comics and figure out how to make it into a book before it got printed, and so at least there's one, and I don't know if I'll be involved as heavily in the future volumes, but if I have the time, I would love to. But if not, it seems that there's going to be more books coming out, and that's just incredible.
Understood, and yeah, congratulations on that. Will there be any? Have you spoken to anyone in Michigan at the state level, or even in the libraries? Obviously, as you say, your grandfather's papers are at the Grand Rapids Library. Are you going to do any sort of presentations? Because it would seem that that's obviously a place where his body of work was printed and certainly known.
Yeah, no, I just recently contacted the Grand Rapids Public Library to find out how to donate a book to them, and they responded and told me they'd love to have me do a presentation. These librarians up on the fourth floor in the local history department, they're awesome, and I fondly remember them, and it's really nice that they remember me too. So we don't have a date for it yet, but I'm hoping it'll be maybe early in 2019. But there's definitely a big audience in Michigan, in West Michigan, where my grandfather lived, and there's a lot of people that still remember his work there. There's several of the high schools still have these like WPA era murals on their walls, and so it's nice to have an audience. If I say, his name is somewhat forgotten, this is a place where it's still remembered. So that's really nice.
That's excellent, man. And yeah, it's those kind of things too, like the WBA PA projects that are very interesting. And I think that's great. God, I hope they videotape whatever presentation you end up doing. I'm in Chicago, so can't make it to Grand Rapids to see that. But I think that's wonderful. And again, it's sad and it's interesting because unfortunately, as each generation moves on, things do get forgotten. And I just think the history of newspaper comic strips is fascinating. I'm glad to see that people remember and would like to help you promote your grandfather's body of work. And I'm glad you found a publisher to keep things going. So to wrap up, I mean, have we missed anything? I don't want to wrap up with you in case there was any more to say specifically about the Mitzi McCoy book.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, I could. The publisher's name is Lost Art Books, and they're at Picture This. I got to get the URL straight if I'm going to plug them here.
Oh, good, man.
Picturethispress.com.
Picturethispress.com. Lost Art Books.
Yes. And so the guy Joe that is the publisher, he has a day job, so this is a sideline for him. So he tends to put out a couple of books a year. So it's kind of when schedules permit and when our schedules sync up, and hopefully there'll be another volume that'll be appearing in September of 2019.
Excellent. It's The Lost Art of Kreigh Collins, Volume 1, The Complete Mitzi McCoy, and by Kreigh Collins and edited and put together by Brian Collins, who we're speaking to. Honestly, if you're a comic strip history fan, this is a very interesting artifact to come across and purchase and explore, because I really think you'll appreciate Kreigh's beautiful work. I mean, this is really outstanding illustrations and very good storytelling as well. So it's another great. I always try during the holiday season to point out interesting potential gift buys, and I would certainly say the Complete Mitzi McCoy is a perfect example of that. So congratulations, Brian. Honestly, this is a great book, and best of luck on Volume 2. I hope there's a Volume 3, and like I said, I hope you consider continuing with, and now shame on me, I'm blanking, Kevin the Bold?
Yes.
Kevin the Bold, yes, absolutely,
exactly.
Man. No, and again, that's
Volume 3, Kevin the Bold.
All right, it makes sense. And again, you get a good sense of Kevin the Bold in Volume 1. So a lot of interesting storytelling ideas from Kreigh Collins in this Mitzi McCoy Volume 1. So congratulations, man, and good luck with everything.
Thank you so much, John, and thanks for having me on Word Balloon.
Brian Collins, I hope you'll consider the Complete Mitzi McCoy. It would make an excellent Christmas gift. It's from Lost Art Books, and an interesting exploration of Brian's grandfather, Kreigh Collins. I hope you enjoyed today's Word Balloon. It was brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Truly, League, I appreciate the support through the holiday seasons and beyond by subscribing to Word Balloon. Do you like what you hear with Word Balloon? Do you think that it's worth the price of a comic book each month, or even $1 a month? If you can spare it and would consider subscribing to Word Balloon, you can do that via Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Word Balloon. Thank you, League of Word Balloon listeners. This episode is also brought to you by Aftershock Comics. It's the Christmas season, and Aftershock has a whole slew of books in various genres by your favorite writers and artists, and I think you will find an interesting new series to introduce to the comic fan in your life. A new Aftershock series or graphic novel would make an excellent Christmas gift. You can consider things like Beyonders by Paul Jenkins and Wesley St. Clair, Animosity by Marguerite Bennett and Raphael De La Tour, Lollipop Kids from Adam and Aidan Glass and Diego Yapur, and Baby Teeth, the Year One hardcover from writer Donnie Cates and Gary Brown, the first 10 issues already in comic shops. You can also consider Pestilence from Frank Thierry and Oleg Akunev. The first trade paperback is now available. The second trade will be available in early January. Of course, Witchhammer, Aftershock's first original graphic novel from the team of Cullen Bunn and Dalibor Talajak. That will be in comic stores December 19th. Do yourself a favor. Check out full story descriptions, preview pages, and the diamond codes on these books to order through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. Thanks again for listening. More Word Balloon coming in December. Great conversations on the way. It's going to be a tremendous holiday season with a lot of interesting conversations in the Word Balloon tradition. I hope you'll check them out. If you're a boxing fan, I have the Big Bout podcast. It's a new addition to the Word Balloon Network. I've been doing it since September. I had a great conversation this week with Doug Fisher, the editor of Ring Magazine, and you can find that podcast in the same places that you find Word Balloon, iTunes, Stitcher, and the like. and you can find them under the name The Big Bout Podcast. I hope you'll check that out. Of course, there's the Aw Yeah Podcast with Art and Franco. We're still cranking out episodes, and we're going to do our best to do some great December episodes for you as well. Great stuff from the Word Balloon Network, and happy to present it to you each week. Until next time, Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2018.